Listen carefully. 20 million barrels of crude oil every single day, flowing through a maritime corridor so claustrophobic you could drive across it in 20 minutes. At its narrowest, the Strait of Hormuz is just 21 miles wide. Now, picture a single regime deciding to completely sever that global artery. No diplomatic warnings, no extended negotiations, just sudden, absolute silence, shattered only by sea mines dropping into the water and fast attack crafts circling in the pitch black. When that exact nightmare scenario materialized, the global order panicked. CNN cameras zoomed in on the maritime flames, oil markets spiraled into an immediate freefall, and international supply chains prepared for a terminal hemorrhage. But while the international community watched the Persian Gulf burn, they missed the true geopolitical masterstroke playing out in the shadows. One country had already built the exit door, quietly, methodically, a multi-billion-dollar engineering marvel hiding in plain sight. Saudi Arabia wasn't trapped, and the weapon they unleashed to break the blockade changes the global architecture forever. To understand the magnitude of what Riyadh engineered, you must first calculate the sheer devastation of the kill box Iran activated. On February 28, 2026, following targeted military operations by U.S. and Israeli forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps executed its ultimate geographical threat. They slammed the Strait of Hormuz shut. This was not a theoretical exercise or geopolitical posturing. The IRGC laid vast fields of sea mines, deployed swarms of fast attack craft, and initiated systematic drone strikes against commercial tonnage navigating the darkness. The Kuwaiti Very Large Crude Carrier Al Salami was struck directly while anchored at the port of Dubai, and a Qatari energy tanker was hit by projectiles north of Doha. The mathematical fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. Within days, maritime intelligence confirmed that tanker traffic through the corridor collapsed by an astonishing 90%. Approximately 3,000 vessels were paralyzed, thousands of maritime crew members were impacted, and roughly 27% of the entire global seaborne crude oil trade was abruptly wiped off the map. Financial tracking painted a bloodbath of unprecedented proportions. Oil prices detonated, surging from a baseline of roughly $70 per barrel just before the conflict to a crippling average of $130 by March. Standard & Poor's Global immediately baked in an average $15 per barrel premium into their long-term 2026 forecasts. The insurance markets panicked in lockstep. Underwriting premiums for ships daring to transit, the strait exploded from a manageable 0.125% to a staggering 0.4% of total vessel hull value, according to maritime intelligence data. For a standard, very large crude carrier, that translated to a brutal penalty of over $250,000 for a single, highly lethal crossing. The titans of global logistics quickly tapped out. On April 1st, Maersk, CMA CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd, the world's largest container shipping lines, suspended all Hormuz transits indefinitely. Maritime intelligence firm Kepler reported that approximately 170 container ships, with a combined capacity of around 450,000 20-foot equivalent units, were effectively trapped or restricted inside the Persian Gulf, a massive steel graveyard floating in the dark. This was the Iranian strategic doctrine operating at terminal velocity. Their greatest weapon was activated and bleeding the global economy exactly as designed, except for one fatal miscalculation. Saudi Arabia wasn't trapped, and that changes everything. Welcome to Dr. Clara Mitchell. If you're new here, this channel is your deep dive source for the military, geopolitical, and economic stories that are completely reshaping the world. If you are not following this channel yet, subscribe right now, because what I am about to show you is infrastructure warfare at a scale most people do not even realize is possible. Hit that button. On March 12, 2026, while the rest of the Persian Gulf was suffocating, Saudi Transport Minister Saleh Al-Jasser walked into the Jeddah Islamic port and announced the Western Coast Logistics Corridors Initiative. This was not a panicked improvisation or an emergency scrambling of assets. This was the detonation of a shadow master plan years in the making. Riyadh had pre-built an entire alternative geography for global trade, a triple logistical fortress, fully connected and designed specifically to absorb the exact shockwave that was currently obliterating everyone else. The trap had been sprung, but the most valuable target had already quietly removed itself from the cage. The question now is, how exactly did Riyadh build an exit door out of an active war zone? What Riyadh had constructed is best understood as three distinct but interlocking weapons, three operational shields, each one formidable on its own, but together forming a logistical wall so utterly complete that Iran's greatest geopolitical trump card crumbles against it like paper. The first of these weapons is a sprawling, high-capacity global port network, definitively centered on the Jeddah Islamic port on the western coast, a reality explicitly confirmed by the Saudi Ports Authority, known as Mawani. This is not merely a regional transshipment hub. It is an engineered leviathan built for global absorption. Following an $800 million expansion of its South Container Terminal completed in 2025, Jeddah alone is now capable of handling approximately 7.5 million 20-foot equivalent units annually. Collectively, Saudi Arabia's Red Sea ports possess a staggering annual operational capacity exceeding 18.6 million TEUs, according to Mawani intelligence. The momentum was already building before the conflict even began. In June 2025 alone, export containers surged 17.79% year-on-year, while import containers grew by 10.68%. Much of this massive baseline capacity was historically underutilized, waiting in the wings. The Hormuz crisis changed that operational latency overnight. CNN reported that Jeddah port officials were immediately projecting a 50% surge in maritime arrivals within just 2 weeks of the crisis igniting in March 2026. The architecture of this network is staggering. Jeddah Islamic Port is now directly and inextricably connected to 9 major international ports spanning Asia, Europe, and beyond. According to strategic intelligence detailed by Arab News, these connections systematically bypass the Persian Gulf entirely, linking the Red Sea directly to Tianjin, Xinjiang, Qingdao, Ningbo, and Shanghai in China. The network extends aggressively into Busan in South Korea, Tanjung Pelepas in Malaysia, and Singapore, with additional strategic hubs branching into the western and eastern Mediterranean, and deep maritime routes reaching South Africa via the Cape of Good Hope. This is not a fragile network heavily dependent on the geopolitical temper of neighboring states. This is a full-spectrum global logistics web, and Jeddah sits exactly at its absolute center. To understand the true lethality of this network against Iranian leverage, you must look east. On paper, Beijing is Tehran's most important economic partner. For years, China has actively kept the Iranian regime afloat through crippling international sanctions, purchasing massive volumes of Iranian crude oil at steep market discounts, and providing critical diplomatic cover when necessary. But the reality of how Beijing actually operates when its own survival is threatened tells a radically different, cold-blooded story. The Chinese domestic economy consumes enormous, insatiable quantities of oil. Historically, China alone received a full third of all its imported oil strictly via the highly vulnerable Hormuz corridor. Its sprawling coastal factories require massive, uninterrupted energy flows to produce the electronics, automobiles, and industrial goods that relentlessly fuel its export machine. Thousands of outbound containers of finished goods must flow to Gulf markets every single day just to keep the system breathing. A real, sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz is not a distant geopolitical abstraction for Beijing. It is a lethal dagger plunged directly into the heart of the Chinese industrial economy. So, when Saudi Arabia finalized direct maritime links to Shanghai, Qingdao, Ningbo, and the rest of the Asian mainland, bypassing Hormuz with absolute precision, China did not hesitate. Beijing quietly, pragmatically, and ruthlessly stepped right through the exit door Riyadh had opened. As the South China Morning Post reported in early May 2026, geopolitical analysts described this migration as a structural shift in Middle East logistics, observing that Chinese trade flows began systematically routing away from any dependence on the volatile Persian Gulf corridor altogether. Stripping away any illusion of loyalty, China publicly stated that the conflict should not have started and pointedly criticized Iran for attacking regional neighbors, executing a swift and calculated distancing from its supposed strategic partner in Tehran. The geopolitical arithmetic here is unimaginably brutal for the Iranian leadership. Their most valuable ally, the singular superpower they count on most for basic economic survival, is simultaneously and actively utilizing logistics infrastructure specifically designed to make Iran entirely irrelevant. Beijing is placing its long-term strategic bet on Riyadh, not Tehran. And with Saudi Arabia now firmly positioned as the primary, unassailable entry point for Asian goods flowing into the broader Gulf region, that bet only grows larger, heavier, and more permanent with each passing month. Iran believed they were suffocating their enemies inside the strait, completely unaware that Riyadh was already unleashing a second, far more audacious weapon straight across the desert sands. If the 9-port global maritime network was the first blow, the second weapon Riyadh deployed completely obliterated the very concept of maritime choke points. On May 3, 2026, the global logistics architecture experienced a seismic shock. MSC, the undisputed largest container shipping company on Earth, publicly announced the activation of a brand new transcontinental hybrid corridor. This route was engineered to directly connect the industrial heartlands of Europe to the resource-rich Gulf, deliberately and completely bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. The operational mechanics of this corridor are a masterclass in infrastructure warfare. The inaugural vessel on this specialized service departed from the port of Antwerp on May 10th, initiating a meticulously calculated journey with strategic loading stops in Germany, Italy, Lithuania, and Spain. The massive cargo ship sailed south through the Mediterranean, transiting the Suez Canal and entering the Red Sea before docking at Jeddah and the advanced King Abdullah port on Saudi Arabia's western coastline. But here is where the sheer engineering audacity of Riyadh's strategy truly reveals itself. At King Abdullah port, the cargo does not continue its journey by sea. Instead, it is rapidly offloaded and transferred to an armada of massive, high-capacity truck fleets waiting in idle coordination on the expansive coastal highways. This triggers the activation of a 1,300-kilometer steel river. These heavy-duty trucks traverse the full, unforgiving breadth of the Saudi Arabian desert, driving continuously from the western coast, tearing through the capital city of Riyadh, all the way to the city of Dammam on the eastern coast. Once at Dammam, the cargo is seamlessly reloaded onto smaller, agile feeder vessels that distribute the vital goods throughout the Persian Gulf, reaching Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE's sprawling terminal ports in Abu Dhabi without ever approaching the Iranian killbox. This is not a desperate, improvised trucking operation. This is a high-security, technology-driven transcontinental bridge purpose-built for exactly this geopolitical scenario. The entire sprawling system is monitored and tracked in real time by advanced satellite uplinks. Giant, fully autonomous crane systems move thousands of containers at Jeddah and King Abdullah with terrifying precision. To sustain this velocity, a massive logistics park spanning 415,000 square meters at Jeddah was aggressively fast-tracked for completion by mid-2026, with the facility's critical key cranes being expanded from 14 to 22 units. MSC stated explicitly that this route provides reliable, highly competitive shipping options for critical global cargo, automotive parts, advanced consumer electronics, life-saving pharmaceuticals, and essential food products, all flowing smoothly across sovereign Saudi territory without touching a single drop of water under Iranian control. When the world's most powerful private logistics actor commits its multi-billion-dollar fleet and its reputation to a land bridge, it is effectively endorsing Riyadh's vision of itself as the new three-continent hub. Iran's ability to weaponize Hormuz against containerized trade was systematically dismantled overnight. But container ships do not run the global economy. Crude oil does. And for that, Saudi Arabia activated its third, most devastating weapon. A weapon that had been quietly operational for decades, proving that this strategic evasion was always part of a much deeper, longer-term Saudi vision. Its name is Petroline, the East-West crude oil pipeline, and it represents an absolute masterpiece of strategic, subterranean infrastructure. Petroline operates as a massive underground artery, running directly from Saudi Arabia's sprawling eastern oil fields straight to the Red Sea port of Yanbu, covering the full width of the Arabian Peninsula beneath the desert floor. Its sheer volumetric capacity is staggering, capable of moving between 5 and 7 million barrels of crude oil every single day. According to intelligence from the Congressional Research Service, this east-west pipeline possessed approximately 2.6 million barrels per day of available, unutilized throughput capacity beyond its normal baseline operations. Yanbu itself is engineered to aggressively export between 4 and 5 million barrels of crude per day straight out through the Red Sea. During the severe, suffocating Hormuz crisis of 2026, Petroline became the ultimate geopolitical shield. As Saudi economist Ibrahim al-Nasser stated, the pipeline allowed Riyadh to seamlessly maintain oil flows exceeding 5 million barrels per day, even as the Strait of Hormuz burned, single-handedly supporting global market stability during a moment of extreme, paralyzing uncertainty. The tactical reality is absolute. Iran's sophisticated sea mines, their swarming fast attack craft, and their anti-ship ballistic missiles are fundamentally useless against a massive steel pipe buried deep beneath the Saudi desert. To guarantee its invulnerability, the Riyadh administration deployed highly advanced, overlapping air and missile defense systems along the entire length of the corridor. China can now purchase millions of barrels of Saudi crude directly from Yanbu, loading it via the Red Sea. There is zero Iran risk, zero exorbitant transit fees, and zero threat from IRGC attack boats. Iran thought they held the global economy hostage, but as the world fundamentally reroutes its energy and trade, a terrifying realization is dawning on Tehran. What happens when you lock the gate to an empire, only to discover everyone has already left? What Riyadh accomplished in 2026 was not merely a localized tactical victory. It triggered a macro-level identity shift across the entire Middle East. The world's cargo was already routed around Iran, leaving the old geographic choke points fundamentally obsolete. Witnessing Saudi Arabia's absolute logistical supremacy, the surrounding regional powers instantly recognized the new center of gravity and initiated a massive, cascading domino effect of their own. The United Arab Emirates moved decisively, relying on the ADCO pipeline flowing from Abu Dhabi directly to Fujairah, completely bypassing the Hormuz trap. Combined with Riyadh's Petroline, these structural shields represented millions of barrels of bypass capacity, completely immune to Iranian interference. Iraq recognized the permanent shift and rapidly accelerated its own answer to the Persian Gulf dependency, the Development Road Project. This $24 billion mega-project was engineered to establish a combined railway and highway network, connecting the southern port of Basra directly through to Turkey and the Mediterranean. Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the smaller Gulf states, recognizing the terminal vulnerability of the old maritime routes, began rapidly integrating into the high-tech, fortified network that Saudi Arabia and the UAE had constructed. For the first time in their modern economic histories, these resource-heavy nations achieved genuine, structural redundancy. Riyadh further capitalized on this momentum by leveraging its megacity initiatives. NEOM, situated along the Red Sea coast, evolved from a futuristic concept into an immediate logistical weapon. Official logistical maps broadcasted a new geopolitical reality: a continuous, high-speed corridor flowing from European maritime ports, through Egypt, down to Neom, and branching outward to Kuwait, Iraq, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Oman. Europe, Egypt, Neom, Gulf, your fastest route, was no longer just a corporate slogan. It was the newly drawn map of the world. The global maritime industry was actively voting with its vessels, and they were unanimously voting for Riyadh. The contrast with Tehran during this structural reorganization could not have been more stark or more pathetic. Before the crisis, Roughly 20 million barrels flowed through Hormuz every single day. Now, tanker traffic had collapsed by more than 90%, and the world's largest container lines had suspended operations indefinitely. As the global logistics map redrew itself around a Saudi-led axis, the Iranian parliament descended into the language of sheer desperation. On April 19th, while their straits sat empty, Iranian legislators actually announced plans to draft laws requiring hostile nations to pay transit tolls to cross the corridor. They were bureaucratically attempting to tax a ghost corridor. The Iranian military could conduct massive naval exercises, continuously position their fast attack craft, and pass endless legislative mandates. But what the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps could not do, fundamentally, was threaten ships that simply were not there. This entire operation was the ultimate validation of Vision 2030. That sweeping economic transformation agenda always depended on proving to the international community that the kingdom could be relied upon as a stable, unshakable trade partner even in the midst of a catastrophic regional crisis. The Hormuz blockade was the ultimate existential stress test for this vision, and Saudi Arabia passed it flawlessly. Ports that were previously underutilized were now operating at maximum surge capacity, absorbing the shockwaves of a global crisis without breaking a sweat. The old empire of fear built around a 21-mile strip of water was collapsing in real time, not due to a devastating military defeat, but simply because Riyadh built a much better road. But no geopolitical victory is absolute, and we cannot close this intelligence briefing without a cold, clear-eyed look at the lingering risks. The Strait of Hormuz has lost its grip, but the Iranian regime remains heavily armed and dangerously cornered. In desperate retaliation, Iranian drones have already struck fuel depots and critical Arab energy facilities, including the Samref refinery at Yanbu. The massive port at Jeddah, the crown jewel of this new network, remains potentially within range of escalating, asymmetrical Iranian aggression. Riyadh knows the stakes. They deeply understand that a prolonged, uncontained regional escalation threatens the very Red Sea infrastructure they have so meticulously built. Yet, the structural shift remains permanent. Saudi Arabia won one of the most critical geopolitical battles of this century without firing a single shot. They built roads, high-capacity ports, and subterranean pipelines, locking in their new role as the connective tissue of world trade long after the last mine is cleared from Hormuz. This is not just about shipping routes. This is about the future architecture of global power. I want to know your intelligence assessment. Is Iran's Hormuz weapon permanently finished, or will Tehran find a catastrophic way to strike back at the Red Sea infrastructure? Leave your analysis in the comments, because this conversation matters.